The Blue Mountains region has been inhabited for at least 10,000 years. There is evidence that human beings have inhabited the region during all three archaeological periods after the Ice Age, although probably not continuously. Several theories exist as to how the first peoples arrived in the region, the most common being that of a migration over the land bridge known as Beringia, which connected the Asiatic continent with North America during the last Ice Age. These indigenous populations spread south along a corridor between two melting glaciers known as the Cordilleran and the Laurentide ice sheets, and into areas of present-day Ontario over thousands of years. They were hunters, using distinct projectile points made of chert or quartzite stone to hunt large mammals such as mammoth and mastodon. Archaeologists refer to these projectiles as fluted points, often found near the shorelines of glacial lakes such as the ancient Lake Algonquin.
But we have to remember that Ontario has been occupied for over 12,000 years. So there often are many archaeological features on a property, especially one that has a lot of potential. For example, it's on high land, it's on good, well-drained soils, near water.
There is also evidence of human inhabitants in the Blue Mountains during the Archaic period, about 3,000 years ago. As the climate warmed, the landscape very gradually changed from tundra-like to deciduous forest. Archaeological evidence from the woodland period shows that indigenous peoples began to develop new tools, pottery, and pipes. Agriculture developed, which allowed the hunter-gatherer culture to settle into more permanent housing and villages. The most evidence exists of a group of indigenous peoples that lived in the Blue Mountains until 1650. They were the Shiantati, an Iroquoian-speaking peoples whose name essentially means people of the hills. French explorers and fur traders called them the Pétin, an Old French term meaning tobacco, as noted in the diaries of Samuel de Champlain. The origin of the name Pétin is unclear, as there is no evidence that they were involved in large-scale cultivation of tobacco. However, there is evidence of spiritual tobacco use. They were an autonomous people, but closely related in language and culture to the nearby Wyandot.
Craigleith area is so important because that area is the first stop on our long series of removals and forced removals, starting in 1649. I understand it was a moonlit night in winter that we crossed Georgian Bay after being overrun by, at that time, the enemy, and we settled near the village of Ekikariondi, which was the land of the deer village near Craigleith.
There are also, however, sites of the remaining thousands of years, including a period we call the Iroquoian period, because that's when people who spoke an Iroquoian language were in that area. They had arrived at a maize agriculture way of life, and there are many villages that date to the 16th and 17th century that are in that area as well. So when we work on pieces of land or properties, we may encounter any of that 12,000 year archaeological record, and in fact also the early colonial record.
Tragically, the Shiantati were widely affected by disease brought by European settlers. Despite a peaceful trading relationship with the French, many Shiantati died upon the arrival of Europeans. As the fur trade exploded, so did violence and war amongst indigenous communities over hunting territories. In 1649, the Iroquois attacked the neighboring Wyandot community, who fled to the villages of the Shiantati. The Iroquois attacked those villages less than a year later. At least 1,000 people escaped and fled to Mackinac Island in Michigan. However, the Iroquois kept up their pursuit, driving groups of refugees to parts of the western Great Lakes for over 50 years.
Charlie has been literally a person who's led us back home, not only the home of our ancestors, but the home of our hearts and the essence of who we are.
And the marine soil being mixed was very good agricultural soil, and of course what they did grow was corn. So areas which were good for growing corn became the center of a catchment area where there would be forest for hunting and rivers for fishing. So a whole chain of villages spread along the foot of the escarpment, usually about 3 miles apart.
Well, when we excavated these sites, we know we're finding actual small little corn cobs and corn kernels, and we know that they're actually practicing agriculture in addition to fishing and hunting. But we also know that from having done tests, isotopic tests, to determine the contribution of maize to their diet, and we know that it's about 50%. And that means about a pound of corn per day per person. So just think about that for a minute. That village at Plater Martin needs 1,500 pounds of corn per day. So a lot of the time you visit these places and there's these small little gardens beside them. Well, that's obviously false. What you needed was 2 kilometers of corn around these places. So we have to develop a different kind of sense of what that landscape looked like 500 years ago that's quite different than how we think about it. Where we end up wanting to build houses is where people have been living for 12,000 years, and that's because these are gorgeous places. They have an aesthetic about them that are truly impressive. And you can imagine living on the bench that, for example, the Plater Martin site is on, because it's got this beautiful view over the bay, and that's exactly what people wanted then as well. You know, perhaps there were elements of defense, etc., that entered into the mixture, but those aesthetic values are exceptionally important.
The Shiantati were essentially absorbed into the Wendat or Wendat communities. Today, more than 4,000 descendants reside in 2 communities in the United States, the Wendat Nation of Kansas and the Wendat Nation of Oklahoma.
We can look back and see the mistakes that were made on both sides that led to more problems for our people, and other decisions that were made that were decisions that helped us flourish and grow. I hope that people will learn that we're not angry people, although some of us, we all get angry and frustrated, but that we're resilient people. And we're human beings like everyone else, and we hope that people know that we didn't just disappear in 1649. We're still here.